until about 2 weeks ago, Mekanism was one of my least favorite mods in any of the All the Mods packs, entirely because it can be incredibly complicated, especially to get some of the things like Antimatter Pellets, and there's so little information out there on it. It was everything I could do to splice together what I could find in the quest line, what I could find on Reddit, and what I could find on other YouTube tutorials to try to figure out how to do the things I wanted to do. Because of that, the purpose of this video is to give you a one-stop shop to learn basically anything you could want to know about Mekanism, specifically for the All the Mods packs, in a singular location. Now, the way I look at it, you're probably watching this video for one of 3 reasons, so I've split this entire video up into 3 sections so that you can either watch the whole thing or skip to the exact part that you want to see. The 3 sections we're going to be talking about are the basics, the very fundamentals, how to make the alloys, the metallurgic infuser, some basic power. Then we're going to go on to all of the utility options that Mekanism adds for us, talking a little bit about the digital miner, the jetpack, some of the tanks that they add, and then finally section number 3 is the entire setup for how to make antimatter pellets. But before we get started, I'm leaving out one important thing, and that is the fusion reactor. I just feel like it's not a requirement or an important essential for All the Mods 10 to make that power source. What I really want to try to focus on in this video are the things that you really need to know. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm John Hall. Let's get into it. All right, I'm going to be doing this tutorial in the mining dimension purely because it's flat and easier to build in, and I can sort of make myself little sections for each area that I want to talk about. However, in the overworld, you're going to need to start by looking for 3 very specific things. The 3 things you're going to need in order to start with Mekanism is redstone, copper ingots, and osmium ingots. These are going to be the 3 most important things that we use and is the basis for anything else we're going to do in Mekanism. So to start, gather up some of this material, and we're going to start by getting a stack of redstone and a stack of copper ingots. Now, the first thing we're going to need to make is this metallurgic infuser. And if you're really early game, it does require a power source. So our power source we're going to be using is an iron generator. All we have to do is make some steel, use some redstone to create these basic universal cables, just 2 steel and a redstone to make 8 of them. And we're going to run them from our generator into our metallurgic infuser. Then make sure whatever your power source is generating power and is plugged into your metallurgic infuser, and you'll start seeing some power generate in here. From there, what you're going to want to do to start is add some redstone dust and some copper ingots. You'll hear this start making some noise. It's a very clear machine noise that it makes, but it's going to start processing these copper ingots into infused alloy. Now, I do want to mention that this is different than All the Mods 9. And at the beginning of All the Mods 10 and some of the earlier versions, instead of copper ingots, you use iron here to make this infused alloy. They switched it, now it's copper. So once you have some of these infused alloys built up, you're going to wonder, what do we do with those alloys? The first thing that I always do with the infused alloy that I make, because it's my preference for early game power, is make some of these wind generators. These wind generators are just going to take 3 osmium ingots, one of these infused alloys that we're making. The energy tablets just need the redstone, the infused alloy, and some gold. And the basic control circuit is just osmium put in here with redstone as well. Let's get some of that going. If we extend our cable on to the second metallurgic infuser, got some redstone and some osmium, put them both in there just like we did with the last one, it'll begin processing through this osmium. Now you'll notice it takes a relatively reasonable amount of power in order to actually power these things at any decent rate. And the iron generator I have is absolutely struggling now that there's 2 of them, but we do get the basic control circuits. So once we get enough of this built up, we get some gold, we can make one of these wind generators, my personal preference for early game power, and we can plug it in to our basic universal cables, and you'll see that we've got a lot more power now. These are an incredible early game power source, and they allow you to not really have to rely on anything like a generator. They can run most of this stuff pretty much by itself. Now, if you don't happen to like the look of these wind generators, there's a second option that Mekanism provides for early game power, and that is these solar generators, or the advanced solar generators. So the advanced solar generator is just 4 of the normal ones with 2 infused alloy and 3 iron ingots. The normal solar generators are one of those energy tablets we talked about earlier with some more basic materials, and then solar panels, which are, again, just the basic osmium, infused alloy, and then some glass panels. So there's nothing crazy difficult about making these solar generators once you have the infused alloy going. But the reason I tend to not use them is because they're a little big and bulkier. As you can see, they take up several blocks next to them. They look cool, but because they're bigger, and only work during the day, I tend to not use them as much, especially for an early game power source. When I'm tending to not sleep every single night or not have an automated way to switch it from night to day, I tend to stick to wind generators. So you can see, if you feed it enough copper and enough redstone, it'll keep processing through all of this, and it'll get them knocked down pretty quickly. Now at a certain point, you're going to want to upgrade the tier of cable that you have. And in order to upgrade the cable, you can use this infused alloy to craft your basic universal cables into advanced universal cables. You just take the 8 that you made the first time, put an infused alloy in the middle, and it'll create the advanced universal cable. Now at a certain point, that is also not going to be enough capacity to really meet your needs. So that's when you want to upgrade to these elite universal cables. To do that, you're going to have to make this reinforced alloy, which is simply infused alloy with diamond dust inside of the metallurgic infuser. Now to create diamond dust, really all you're gonna have to do is go into some sort of a crafting table, put your diamonds in there, and then also put in a hammer, and that'll make the diamond dust for you. The hammers are really easy to make. All you have to have is 3 sticks and then 2 blocks of whatever material you're trying to make with, and that can be copper or iron or platinum. Now from there, we're gonna go into our metallurgic infuser, and where the redstone would usually go, we're gonna put in our diamond dust and our infused alloy in there as well. And this is going to make us that blue reinforced alloy. Just like the ones before, you can leave all of the materials and stuff in there and just let it work through it. Now there is one higher tier of alloy that is worth mentioning in the basic section because it's not difficult to make. It simply requires 1 or 2 additional machines. So to make the highest tier of universal cable, these ultimate universal cables, you're going to need an atomic alloy to combine with your elite universal cables. That atomic alloy needs refined obsidian in the tank and a reinforced alloy to infuse again. Now, in order to get refined obsidian, these crushers are incredibly easy to make, especially now that you already have your basic control circuits going, and you're probably going to have the rest of the resources there. The only thing you may need to do is create 4 more steel ingots. We're going to set this down and hook it up to some power. Let's grab a stack of obsidian real quick. We'll throw it in here, and then this will start creating us that obsidian dust. So the easiest way to turn this obsidian dust into refined obsidian dust is to use another metallurgic infuser, again with diamond dust in it, and that'll take our obsidian dust and turn it into refined obsidian dust. We'll grab our obsidian dust, and we'll have it start creating some refined obsidian dust. So finally, once you have your refined obsidian dust, you can take your reinforced alloys, put them into this last metallurgic infuser in the same location that the redstone would usually go. And once you have enough, I believe it takes 4 per alloy, it'll start turning this reinforced alloy into the highest tier, which is what you need for the ultimate universal cables. And there you have it. You have your atomic alloy, which will allow you to make the highest tier cabling that you need for all of this. All right, so we've got our ultimate universal cable in place now. And that right there is everything that I would say is the basics for Mekanism. That should cover basically anything that you want to do from a very early game perspective for Mekanism. Now, there are a couple things that I know that there are some gray lines on, but I would consider it more middle game that are certainly worth bringing up. Now, before we get into fluid tanks and chemical tanks and jetpacks and digital mine and all of that stuff, let's first talk about how to automate these processes right here and how to optimize them, because like we talked about, these are going to be the basis for anything else that we're going to do. All right, so first of all, for optimization, I want to run through 3 upgrades that you can add, 2 of which will make the machines work better, and 1 of them will make your life better. So first of all, let's look at speed upgrades. You can add up to 8 speed upgrades to each one of these metallurgic infusers, and there's 2 ways to do that. You can either shift, right click to add the upgrades, or you can come in, open up this tab right here, drop a full stack in, and it will install them that way. A little easier just to shift, right click. We've done everything that we need to make them faster. So next we make them more efficient. We need energy upgrades. We're going to grab a full stack of those. We're going to drop them into all of the machines, which should optimize the amount of power that they use so it's not nearly so bad. Now, the one thing that's probably been bugging you this whole time has also been bugging me, which is why we need the last upgrade, which is called the muffler upgrade. All this does is it removes any of the noise effects from any of these machines. Important to note that if you find the hum from your solar generator annoying, you also can make that go away. So now, when we drop redstone in here, we grab ourselves a stack of copper, a stack of osmium. We can put all the copper in here. You see, it'll absolutely zoom through creating this infused alloy. We can also create our basic control circuits now, and we're not going to be completely annoyed from all the noise that it's going to make. So those are the upgrades I would put on the actual devices themselves. As a further quality of life upgrade, you can also set up auto crafting for these. So let's take a look at how to do that. We're going to use ME pattern providers, some flux glass cables. In addition, we're going to need the ability to create patterns through a pattern encoding terminal and also some Blake patterns. I recognize you can make a much more advanced ME system than this, but this is what we're starting with because it's basic. Now, if we take a redstone, we can see we're currently at 640 millibuckets. We had a single redstone to that. We're now at 650. So we know that we only have to add one redstone per each one of the copper ingots we add to get these infused alloys. Now, I've had some issues with the auto crafting for this being a little weird, where if you tell it to auto craft, it'll kind of just sit there and not do anything. There's an easy way to work around that, and that's just by using some item pipes. Grab yourself a pipe wrench, and then basically any sort of chest. And all we're going to do is move our pattern provider to here. Still connected into our ME system. Still add the processing pattern to it. But we're going to set a chest right in between the metallurgic infuser and the pattern provider, sort of as a buffer. You'll see that automatically the pattern provider will put all of the resources needed into the chest. If we import directly from the chest, we're actually going to have to use two sides, and we'll have to configure it inside of the metallurgic infuser to also import the extra from the top. So the extra will come in the top, and then import will be on the back. And then finally, we're going to output to the bottom. We take another pipe, we come down the bottom, disconnect it there, and it should output directly back into the chest. After saying that out loud, I realized it would be much easier if we just sent it all back to the pattern provider itself. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to suck it out of the metallurgic infuser and send it straight back to the pattern provider. Let me clean up this mess a little bit here, and I'll show you how it works. So if we were to tell our ME system, hey, I would like to make 20 of these infused alloys. We click next or start, and it will send everything to this chest, which will then send everything into the metallurgic infuser, and it'll start making all of these copper ingots into our infused alloys. Now, because I had to break it to fully set this up correctly, I did accidentally remove all of the upgrades that we put on it. But once you add all the upgrades, you can see it'll go incredibly quickly, and you shouldn't have to worry about power or how long it takes to create all of that, and it'll send it all directly back to your ME system. Now, I guarantee somebody out there knows how to automate this a little bit better. The problem I have with automating this is the pattern provider will not always push all of the items that you need into the metallurgic infuser. So I just set this up to sort of show you how I would automate it if I was trying to do that. It's also worth mentioning that you can use those upgrades on basically any of the Mekanism devices that you're going to make. We're going to do a lot of different devices for making the antimatter pellets and stuff like that. All of those can get those speed upgrades, the energy upgrades, and the muffling upgrades. All right, now one thing we're going to go ahead and set up that we're going to need later on is this electrolytic separator. And basically what it does is it breaks down water and it turns it into hydrogen and oxygen. Now, these are both things that we're going to want to have later on for different things. So we're going to go ahead and set it up right now so I can show you how it works. Now, once you have the basic stuff here going, making something like the electrolytic separator is not that difficult. Like, you're going to have the basic stuff, and then the core is just some, again, really basic materials that you need. We're going to grab one of those. We're going to set it down and hook it into power. And then all we really need to do with this, guys, we need to input water into it. The easiest way to do this by far is to use a sink and hook it up with some fluid pipes. This will basically allow it to stay maxed out on how much water it's producing, and in turn, how much hydrogen and how much oxygen it's producing. Now, like we talked about, not only can we, but we definitely want to use the speed and energy upgrades on this. In addition to that, for my own sanity, I always add the muffler upgrade as well. You'll see that we've made a whole ton of hydrogen and plenty of oxygen, but it really has no place to go. For the sake of this video, what we're going to do is we're going to put this out into 2 chemical tanks. We'll go ahead and use the highest tier of these. You can certainly use a lower tier, but for the sake of what we're doing, we're going to use the highest tier ones. Also worth noting that for this, we're going to need the gas pipes because we're transporting chemicals, not fluids anymore. We're going to split off of this in two different directions here. Make sure to separate them. And then also we're going to need to go in here and we're going to need to set up the config so that for chemicals, we're going to be outputting to the left, number 1, and then to the front, we want to output number 2. We reset up the chemical pipes and then all of a sudden they start working. We set up the output using the pipe wrench. We're going to add some upgrades to it so it goes really quick. And then you'll see these will stay empty, but our chemical tanks are filling up incredibly quickly. So the reason I mentioned doing this first, setting up this process right here where you're pumping an infinite amount of water in and creating an infinite amount of hydrogen and oxygen is because we will need it later, but you also need it for one of the utilities that I wanted to mention, which is this Mekanism Jetpack. Now the Mekanism Jetpack is not like difficult to make. You need 10 steel, some basic control circuits, and then a basic chemical tank. None of that is very difficult to make whatsoever. And it allows you to charge up using hydrogen your jetpack. Now, in order to actually charge up this armored jetpack, what we're going to do is we're just going to take it, we're going to throw it in our ultimate universal or ultimate chemical tank that's got the hydrogen in it. And it's just going to pull the hydrogen out that it needs and fill up in the actual jetpack. This jetpack's pretty cool. It works really well. It allows you to fly, has a cool effect, but isn't quite as good as some of the other jetpacks. It's just a little easier to make. The second cool tool I wanted to show you is the digital miner. Now the digital miner is a little bit more expensive and will take you a little bit longer to get. As you can see here, it needs some teleportation core, some atomic alloys. It's going to need our steel casing, a robot that needs our refined obsidian ingots that we were making earlier, some more atomic alloy. It needs quite a bit to make this. Nothing crazy expensive. All of it's going to start from basic materials, but it can take you a little while to actually get to the digital miner. But once you have it, boy, let me tell you, it is well worth it. All you're going to do for the digital miner is you're going to set it down in the world somewhere. Then you're going to want to go to config. You're going to set up this block radius. In general, I max out this block radius. In order to do that, just type in 9s for every single one of these, with one exception, which is the minimum Y level. You actually want to go all the way down. I believe you can go to -99, which will go to -64, which is the bottom of the world. What this means is it's searching in a 32 block radius. It will go all the way down to -64, and the max Y level is 319. Now, what the really cool thing about the digital miner is that you can add filters for specifically what you want to mine. Meaning that if I wanted to only mine diamonds, I could come in here, add a star, type in ores, a / and diamond, and it would only search for any sort of diamond ore. Save that, go back, and all I have to do is provide this power, tell it to start, and it's going to start mining all of the diamonds that it can find in that 32 block radius, as high as it can go and as low as it can go. Worth mentioning, this thing takes a lot of power to really run well, but if you're willing to splurge early on for some of these energy upgrades, you can make it run pretty decently well. And then once you have a lot of energy going to it with something like an ender gate, you can throw the speed upgrades on here and then it'll run incredibly fast. Now, the one tip I really want to give you about the digital miner is it has a special trick that you can do specifically for trying to go through the dungeon in the place that you get the Allthemodium smithing template from. If you're in the world and you hit F3 and H, you'll notice it turns on advanced tooltips. If you go into your just enough items and you search for spawners, the problem with the dungeon and the other is that there are so many spawners. You hold control to see what tags these spawners have. And you'll notice that there is one specific one called Minecraft : features _ cannot _ replace. If you were to take that tag and in here, go to your config, add new filter, tag, and you add it in here, you hit enter and it'll have a status of OK, and it will include any type of spawner. Now you do have to be a little bit careful with this because in order to get the unobtainium smithing template, you do have to go through a trial spawner, and this will mine that. So what you really want to do is you want to set this up right in the center of the dungeon in the other. Click save, uncheck the diamond ones, just have this features you cannot replace when running, and you're just going to use it there. What it will do is it will take everything from the 4 pillars around you and the center, and if you have this silk touch thing on, it will actually pick up all of those spawners, allowing you to have them and keep them and potentially use them in some sort of a mob farm later on. I cannot tell you how much I recommend doing this. It makes your life so much easier. There are other ways to get around all the mobs in the dungeon and the other, but this is by far my favorite. Now, the final process that they really want you to know about as far as using the quest line in Mekanism is setting up this ore processing factory. Now, this ore processing factory basically allows you to multiply your output for each one of the specific ores that you get. Now, they do a really good job of walking you through exactly how to do this, which is why I'm not going to actually showcase it. They provide pictures and everything for exactly where each thing should go. But more than that, the reason I'm not going to walk through this is because in reality, you're not actually going to need that. Maybe at the very beginning of the game, you want to multiply your ores, but eventually you're going to want to automate your ore so that you're not actually having to go mine it all. So I'm just going to recommend that you use something like mystical agriculture or productive bees, so this doesn't even become an issue for you where you're actually needing to multiply your ores, because I think that'll make your life a lot easier than trying to set this up. But I did want to point it out that it is there in case you do want to. All right, so that is basically everything that I tend to set up for Mekanism within the beginning stages and the middle stages of an All the Mods mod pack. Specifically All the Mods 10. Now, the last and final thing that I really want to go through is the entire process for making antimatter pellets. And the reason I want to walk through the whole process is because if you've ever looked at it before, it is incredibly difficult to set up because you're constantly working backwards. So to make the antimatter pellets, you have to have crystallized antimatter through a chemical crystallizer. In order to get the antimatter, you have to go through the supercritical phase shifter and have polonium. In order to get polonium, you have to run nuclear waste, so on and so forth. This is going to go back a long ways, and there's a lot you have to set up for it. So instead of working backwards, what you and I are going to do is we're going to work forwards. So we're going to start with the things that you actually have to have at the very beginning, and we're going to work our way all the way to the antimatter pellets. All right, so please ignore some of the construction that's going on behind here. That's unimportant for this video. What we're going to look at is the entire setup that I have here for creating the antimatter pellets. Eventually, we'll get down there to that, but we're going to start here. So the number one thing you're going to have to do is get a ton, and I mean a ton, of sulfur. What I did was I set sulfur up in my mystical agriculture farm. We're growing a lot of it, so that way we have a lot of it to run through this chemical oxidizer. The chemical oxidizer is important. Item number 1, I actually have 3 of these. What it does is it takes the sulfur and it turns it into sulfur dioxide. From there, the sulfur dioxide is sent into this chemical infuser. Now, the chemical infuser also has to have oxygen, which is the second output from the device that we were talking about earlier, where you can use the hydrogen to charge your jetpack. Take the oxygen from that and pump it into this chemical infuser with the sulfur dioxide, and it'll transform it into sulfur trioxide. Now, from there, we're also going to have to combine that sulfur trioxide with some water vapor. So take a rotary condensator, and we're going to use the decondensating setting. Man, that's a hard word to say. And we're going to take the water and we're going to turn it into water vapor. That will then get put into this chemical infuser, and the water vapor will combine with that sulfur trioxide into sulfuric acid. Feel free to pause this video at any point. The only reason I'm going to go through this entire process is because when I was looking up how to set this up, there was absolutely no guide. Working from step 1 to step 15, I had to go through it manually, going from step 15, working all the way backwards until we eventually got to some basic materials. So the goal of this is just to help you so that you see what step 1 is all the way to the finished product. So we combine that water vapor with our sulfur trioxide to get sulfuric acid. That sulfuric acid is then pumped into a chemical dissolution chamber with the addition of our second resource. I also highly recommend automating fluorite because you're going to need this for several different things. But if you take the fluorite and you combine it with sulfuric acid, you get hydrofluoric acid. you know, fluorite, sulfuric acid, hydrofluoric acid. It makes sense. Then you take a chemical oxidizer, you add some yellow cake uranium, which is created by using an enriching factory. You take some uranium, which is the third and final basic item we're going to need that I would highly recommend setting up some automation for. You take the uranium, you put it in an enriching factory, and it turns it into this yellow cake uranium, which, like we mentioned, gets sent to the chemical oxidizer, which turns this yellow cake uranium into uranium oxide. And then finally, the uranium oxide is combined with that hydrofluoric acid we made to create uranium hexafluoride, which is an incredibly complicated chemical that we had to make. And then all of that gets pumped into this isotopic centrifuge. Our uranium hexafluoride gets turned into fissile fuel. So all of these items here are all hooked up with our ME system to make that one item, which is this fissile fuel that we need in order to power our fission reactor. Now, if you're not confused with this process whatsoever, then you're not paying attention. That's what I would start with. But again, feel free to go back, pause the video, walk through each step of this process so that you can figure out exactly how to set it up. I do have all of these items with max speed and max energy upgrades, and they also all have import and export buses on them so that I can control each step of the process, and all of those items are stored permanently in my ME system. Now, once we have the fissile fuel created, we have to make something called the fission reactor. I would highly recommend not making this in your base because they explode and can lead to nuclear radiation. It's not a good time. This is the first fission reactor that they want you to create. It's very, very simple, and it provides a decent amount of nuclear waste. The fission reactor that's built up exactly how they want you to. You've got the reactor glass, the reactor casings, and then we have 4 reactor ports on the front. Each of these 4 reactor ports go to something specific. The fissile fuel is coming in through here from our ME system and being pumped into the fission reactor. The water is coming directly from a sink and being pumped into the reactor. We are taking the heated coolant, we are pumping that directly out of gas pipe into a fluid trash can. And then we are taking our waste tank, which is our nuclear waste, and we're putting that all into this tank here. Now, this tank here actually imports back into our ME system because we need that nuclear waste for a couple different things. So you can start with a really small fission reactor like this, or you can build a much bigger one like this. The only restrictions it has is that you need to have the fuel rods in there, and then there is a fuel rod controller that goes at the top of each of the pylons. Now, the bigger it is, the more water you're going to have to fill it. There are better ways to do it than this, but I just set up a whole bunch of fluid pipes here with these sinks, and they all have ultimate pipe upgrades in them, so it just funnels in water really, really quickly. Same here with the heated coolant output. Has to go into the trash can still. They all have these ultimate pipe upgrades, very quick. And then our waste output, once again, is also pumping into this same radioactive waste barrel here, and then going back into our ME system. So all of this is conveniently set up inside of a single chunk in the mining dimension. Keeps it nice and simple. It means I only have to force load one chunk rather than anything more than that. All right, so this is what takes the fissile fuel and turns it into nuclear waste. Now, once we have nuclear waste, what do we have to do? There are 2 items that you want to start creating first. And the first one of those is by using this isotopic centrifuge. If you take that nuclear waste and you pump it into one of these isotopic centrifuges, it allows you to create plutonium. Now, this is important because it is needed to make the SPS casings. You need these plutonium pellets. To make the plutonium pellets, you just combine some water with the plutonium you're making from this isotopic centrifuge, along with some fluorite dust, turns it into plutonium pellets, and makes spent nuclear waste. Now, the spent nuclear waste I'm currently just exporting into these empty radioactive waste barrels. It eventually goes away, but it does sit there for a little while. So this is where we're making the plutonium pellets. Again, like we talked about, exporting water to it, plutonium pellets, making the fluorite dust into plutonium pellets, and then also some of these solar neutron activators. This will take the same nuclear waste, but we'll turn it into polonium. So the first one, the isotopic centrifuge, makes plutonium. This makes polonium. You'll have to switch out where you want your nuclear waste to go. Long term though, these are the devices you're really going to want to have. So those make the polonium that you're going to need. And the polonium, after you combine it, like we talked about here, with the fluoride dust in the water to make the pellets, and then you get your SPS casings. It's what's going to give you this antimatter that you can put in your chemical crystallizer. And then finally, after an hour of me blabbing on, make your antimatter pellets. Now, the one other thing you need to make the SPS casings are these HPDE sheets. Those are pretty easy to make. Once you have your enriching factory that is turning your uranium into your yellow cake uranium, you just need HDPE pellets. All you need to make that is to get a pressurized reaction chamber, add your oxygen like we talked about earlier, and then also get some of this liquid ethene in there. Liquid ethene's pretty simple to make. All you need to do to get the liquid ethene is get some hydrogen and a pressurized reaction chamber with some water, and then finally get some biofuel in there, and then that'll create your ethene. It also creates your substrate that you're going to need in your pressurized reaction chamber with your liquid ethene, so that you can make those HDPE pellets. But there's really nothing crazy complicated about that process, especially if you've already set up or are working to set up the process for actually making your fissile fuel. So there you have it. That's the basics of everything I wish I had known about Mekanism before coming into all the mods 10. Hopefully this video helps you and answers some of the questions that you might have as well. Like I mentioned, if there's anything I missed or anything you feel like I could add to this video, please feel free to leave those in the comments down below. There's a lot of people that watch these videos to figure out what they want to do in their own worlds, and so your comments are incredibly helpful. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support lately on the videos. Don't forget, you're special, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.